One day in November 2012, I'm wrapping up with my therapist.
See you next week, Clayton.
And as I walk into the lobby, I see the same lady that I see every week. And I love this lady. She always cheers me up so much because the thing with her is she looks terrible. She looks just awful, like a devastated shell of a human being. I mean, it looks like she died like 3 days ago, and like no one told her, so she doesn't know. And I see her, and I feel so much better about myself, because I'm like, well, she's got something serious. At least I don't have something serious. But then I take a look at my therapist bill, and I've noticed something strange, because at the bottom of the bill, it says diagnosis DSM 296. And I don't know what this means, so I look it up on a very reputable medical website, Yahoo Answers, and I find out I have what's called a major depressive disorder. And that's disappointing. Because I feel like when you get something called a major depressive disorder, you want to hear about it from, like, the voice of God, like,
you have a major depressive disorder.
Instead, I got old guy from Yahoo Answers. I'm a comedian. I write jokes about depression. I write jokes about suicide. I write jokes about very sad things. A lot of people think of comedy as a defense mechanism. Making jokes out of our problems seems so much easier than confronting them in any meaningful way. But I don't agree with that view. Today, I want to ask, what if instead of thinking about comedy as a way to flee from the valley of darkness that we find ourselves in from time to time, we think of it as an opportunity to wrestle with and explore that darkness? What if instead of thinking about comedy as a way to avoid our problems, we think of it as a way to process those problems and put them in perspective? What if we see comedy as a form of therapy in and of itself? In December 2012, I'm at the lowest point that I've ever been. I had recently gone through a very difficult breakup, and I find myself thinking about my ex-girlfriend at every moment, just obsessing about her, having multiple panic attacks, losing interest in everything, and on Christmas morning, I become so unbearably sad that I lock myself in the bathroom to cry on the toilet for the rest of my life. In fact, I become so depressed that I finally decide to fill a prescription for Zoloft. Now, you all might remember Zoloft as the cute antidepressant. He's like that little blob that bounces around. Look at him, he's adorable. But when you go on an antidepressant, there's a gauntlet of side effects that you have to go through. Some of Zoloft's listed side effects include insomnia, decreased bladder control, and my personal favorite, a worsening of depression. Now, I'm no doctor, but that seems like the opposite of what is good. So I was pretty messed up in the head, and I decided to go see Les Mis at the movie theater. I don't know why I thought it would be a good idea to see a movie called The Miserables. Maybe because it's got music and movie stars and tons of miserables. I'm at the theater. Anne Hathaway is singing. I dreamed a dream in times gone by. And I think to myself, Anne Hathaway's complexion is remarkably similar to my ex-girlfriend's complexion. They both have skin on their faces. I dreamed that love would never die. And all of a sudden, Anne Hathaway is no longer Anne Hathaway. She has become the physical manifestation of every doubt and insecurity that I've ever had in my life. Which, when you think about it, does make her a very good actor. I mean, bravo, Anne Hathaway. Moments later, I'm outside the AMC theaters and I'm having a panic attack, and there are all these kids walking by shouting, "Woo, Wreck-It Ralph! Wreck-It Ralph! And I say, don't see Les Mis. It's about my ex-girlfriend, and it will ruin you. Here's a little secret. When that event happened for real, it was not funny at all. In fact, it was one of the worst moments that I've ever had in my life. And so writing a joke about it doesn't seem that natural. And yet for me, it kind of was. Oh, let me break down how I wrote that joke. I knew there was something inherently funny in the idea of having a panic attack at Les Mis. But why? And I realized that the funniest part of that story was that I voluntarily chose to see an incredibly depressing, hyper-emotional movie musical at a time in my life when I was also incredibly depressed and hyper-emotional. And so I wrote these lines like, Les Mis is about my ex-girlfriend, which is a funny thought because it's absurd and not true, but for me, at that time in my life, felt very true. The better I was able to capture these ideas, the funnier the story became. Because I was able to capture the heightened absurdity of the way my brain was behaving. So, in the process of writing comedy, I was becoming more aware of my emotions, more observant of my patterns of behavior, and more articulate about why I felt the way I felt at any given moment. In other words, I was doing the exact same work that I was also doing in therapy. Now, I'm not trying to suggest that writing comedy should replace work with a therapist. Far from it. In fact, I strongly believe that the work I do writing comedy about the darkest moments in my life actually reinforces my work with my therapist. Still, it may seem like my message is this. If you have depression, great, become a stand-up comedian. That's not it. First, don't become a stand-up comedian. It's incredibly competitive and insecure, and you'll doubt yourself at every moment. Your parents will be disappointed. Just don't do it. Second, the point is not so much that you have to be a professional joke writer to benefit from comedy as therapy. The point is that if you ask yourself, is there any way that this painful experience I've just had might actually be kind of funny? Then you might find yourself moving on more quickly. They say that comedy equals tragedy plus time. I think we can take that idea one step further. I believe that comedy actually helps us make sense of tragedy. Somebody once asked me why it's so hard for a depressed person to cheer up. And I said, well, to a depressed person, happiness is like black licorice. It's supposed to be candy, but actually, it's just total crap. I see we have a lot of black licorice fans in the crowd tonight. Comedy is a way for us to articulate our experience in the shadows, not just to those around us, but also to ourselves. It is a profoundly healing and therapeutic act. That's an idea that inspires me, and I hope it can inspire you too. Thank you.